Hi, I'm Lana Abraham-Murawski. This is how I create.
Hey, welcome back to This Is How We Create. My name is Martine Severin, your host. I'm so happy to welcome Lana Abraham-Murawski to the show. Lana is a visual artist who's making a special kind of work that takes courage. When you look at Lana's vibrant, fantastical landscapes, you realize that her boldness doesn't just show up on the canvas, it also shows up in her personal life. Lana and her family moved from Guyana to Queens when she was just 5 years old. And if you're a third cultural kid like me and like Lana, you know that navigating multiple cultures really does take determination. So does putting your traditional career on hold to pursue art when everyone around you is saying, why don't you become a doctor? Why don't you become a lawyer? Lana's paintings blend birds, natural elements, and industrial structures in surprising way. And what do you mean by surprising ways? Well, you'll just have to wait and watch this video on YouTube. So you could go to our YouTube channel to check it out because she's going to walk us through her work. If you're listening to this episode in the traditional podcast ways where you get your podcast, don't worry. You can also just go ahead and look at the timestamps in the show notes. That way you can check out her explanations and as she walks us through her work. When I look at Lana's work, her bold use of colors and the imaginative scenes that she paints, she invites us to break down the artificial barriers that we have with each other. Lana draws from her West Indian roots to create spaces where conversations can happen without judgment. What's more, her journey from childhood doodles to large scale paintings wasn't just a straight line, when is it? Much like the organic shapes she uses in her work. But what I found compelling about Lana's story is how she describes returning to art after taking time away from raising her son. Specifically, she says, when I wasn't doing art, I just felt stuck. But when brush meets canvas, there's this sort of meditative release that brings her back to her core. Lana Abraham-Murawski is continuing to share her vision, her unique vision through exhibitions with the Black Artists and Designers Guild and her studio at Mana Contemporary. I am so pleased to have Lana on the show. And so let's turn over the mic to her. Welcome back to This Is How We Create. My name is Martine Severin, your host. Today we have Lana Abraham-Murawski on the show. Lana, welcome.
Hi, Martine. I'm really glad to be here. I'm excited to talk about my work and yeah, let's get going.
Well, Lana, I want to apologize to you and to our listeners in advance because I have this wonderful cold. And while in my head, I feel like I'm talking like myself, I know that it's probably coming across as really nasally. So, but what you gonna do, you know? We get
You
colds.
sound all right. I can hear you, so that's all that matters.
So, Lana, could you tell us about yourself and about your creative life and career?
Well, Lana Abraham-Murawski, and I'm an artist. I've always loved art since I was a child. Since I can remember, I always did little doodles, little drawings, little sketches. And my mom got me an art book one time that was like how to draw. And I just love doing those little things. But, coming from my background, I'm Guyanese American. We didn't have much growing up. It was always about becoming a doctor, become a lawyer, study, make money. It wasn't about choosing an art life. So it wasn't until like high school and more so in college that I, really got more exposed to art and other artists and comfortable exploring this as a way of life and going after it. So I don't know what more you want to talk about with the background there, but it's just something that I've always been passionate about. And doing my paintings and drawings now, I'm hoping to be able to tell my story and tell stories in general and have people find their own stories through my work and feel inspired the way that I was with art.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that with us, Lana. So, you did mention that you were from Guyana, and it sounds like you moved to the US when you were 5. Do you have early memories of being in Guyana?
Yeah, I actually have some really small memories of my house was on stilts when I was younger. And I remember being underneath the house and there were like chickens and things running around. And I also had this neighbor that liked to sing. And so some of my earliest memories of remembering this, not even remembering what the neighbor looks like, but just remembering him singing and just, him singing songs and just being outside that way. But that's probably my earliest memory. I don't really have too many other real memories of being in Guyana itself. It was more so when I was in the US because I was so young when I left.
Oh gosh, I left Haiti when I was 10. It's funny the things you remember. I remember the smell of bread baking. There was a bakery right next door to us. And we would wake up in the morning and it would be the most wondrous smell. And we would get sent over to pick up some bread for breakfast and just biting into it. I just have all these memories of food and eating, really. So you moved to New York, is that correct? Your family moved directly to New York after leaving Guyana?
Yeah, after I left Guyana, my family moved to Queens, New York, and near Lefferts Boulevard area. It's like Little Guyana right now, if you've ever been there. So yeah, I grew up there mostly. We moved from a different house to a different house, but ended up really in South Ozone Park, Queens. And I went to school there. And through going to school, I got into a program called Prep for Prep. It's a really great program that helps the inner city youth of New York City connect to private and preparatory schools for like better education. So whether they're private day schools or private boarding schools like the one I went to, it was a really great program for kids who were excelling in academics to attend and gave a lot of inner city kids a lot of exposure. So that's kind of like where my upbringing was. So I grew up in a city, was a city girl, but then went away to school and got exposed to a lot of other different cultures and faiths and viewpoints that were very different from my own. So that was very interesting.
Was this St. Andrews?
Yeah, this was St. Andrews. And while I was in St. Andrews, I think that one of the things that you had asked me about before was where did my creative stuff come from? Like I'd always been an artist at my core, drawing and painting, but not really thinking that was something important. And when I went to St. Andrews, I took a class called Art and Bio, and this class was obviously focused on being outside in biology and nature, but it was co-taught by the biology professor and also the art professor at the time. And you would go outside and you would enjoy nature, you would enjoy the air and the birds and the insects and hearing the silence, like so different from being in the city. But then you had to always also journal all of that and journal the birds and the leaves and the trees and the insects. And so when I was doing that, it was so peaceful and meditative, just being out there, but also love doodling and drawing anyway. So that brought more of my artistic juices out. And even though I was there for academics, I started to lean a lot more heavy into art. And the art professor helped guide me and gave me a space. And I took more art classes. And I was really allowed to just blossom and have my work kind of come out and be exposed. And it was a time where I was trying to, figure out my identity as well. Black, female, but I come from Guyana. A lot of people didn't even know where that was. They always say, "Oh, you're from Ghana." I'm like, "No, I'm not from Africa. I'm from South America." But it was always like this invisible world that people didn't really know, at least the environments that I was in at boarding school. And so trying to figure out what my identity, who I was, also social economically, a lot of those kids were a lot more well off than my family was. I got there through the program. So trying to understand all these little social dynamics, cultural dynamics, racial dynamics of like who I was as a person. And that all kind of, I think, came out through my artwork as well. And my parents, unfortunately, had gotten a divorce at that point when I had gotten to school. So there was a lot of turmoil at home as on top of trying to figure myself out. But it also led to the opportunity for me to just play more with art and explore more with art because my mom wasn't as restricting going after these creative things and these creative sides of ourselves, as probably my father was. So, I just drew and painted and created and ended up senior year doing a full exhibit of a lot of these colorful pastel works that were of these imaginary places and colorful places. And I know one of the things that we had talked about briefly before is like where all the color comes from. And I think it just comes from my West Indian roots. It's very colorful, all those colorful shades of who I am, not just being black, but a mixture, because China is very much a mix, a melting pot, a mixture of Black, Indian, Portuguese, Spanish. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And that's where my roots are in a lot of those different varying cultures and shades. And I think I just all came out in the work.
Hmm. Oh gosh. I'm so glad that you had that form of expression to really think about and about all these things that you're experiencing because we know that that time in any child's life is one that is fraught with questions and who am I? What am I going to do? But yet you had this place that you could retreat to.
Yeah. And I'll do a special shout out to my high school art professor, Peter Brook, because honestly, if he didn't see that I needed this space and offer me the space, I always accredit him. He's like, I just gave you a space, but sometimes you just need that. You just need somebody to see that you just need a space to explore and expand. And he did that for me and helped, give me feedback and allow, me to just to kind of explore. And it didn't have to be so traditional. It didn't have to be so exacting. I could just kind of get what I wanted to get out on the paper. So, I do give a special shout out to him for sure.
I'm curious if you were experimenting with abstract shapes even back then.
Oh, absolutely. I started out doing small linear work, and I always did detailing with lines, and I love that. To this day, I still kind of go back to that original core of who I was, a lot of lines, a lot of linear work. And even when I started doing bigger paintings and bigger sketches and drawings, they were all black and white, charcoal or pen, pencil, ink. We did a lot of prints as well. And then one day I don't know why, I did some forms and or these organic forms and shapes, and I just thought that the black and white forms of that wasn't enough. And I just started to pick up the colored charcoal. And then I just kind of went to town and got really more explorative in color. But again, it always came back to organic shapes, nature, maybe from that one experience of being out in nature and how I felt so calming and meditative, but also looking back at my organic roots and how that was very round and orbus. And I just use a lot of shapes that way and connect it to those more organic shape than the rigid, hard, harsh lines of things.
That's so interesting. I'm wondering where that came from. Was it just experimenting?
I don't know. I've always thought back, and when I was younger, I had this really strange dream that was a repeating dream of a cylinder and being trapped on a landscape in this cylinder. And it was a very round, circular, cylindrical, clear shape, but I was inside of it and I was on this landscape. And I don't know why, but I always go back to that somehow. And I don't know if that's driven me in my work at all, but it is something to think about.
Lana, your work is so distinctive that I want us to spend quite a bit of time looking at some of your specific pieces to talk in depth about them. But before we get to that part, I'd love to know what happened after St. Andrews. What did you do then?
Yeah, so I left St. Andrews and then I went to college and I took the detour and followed my heart and went and studied studio arts. So I've got a bachelor in studio arts from Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and I was a printmaking major there and focused on printmaking. I loved it because it was very similar to drawing and having these like little details that you would do with metal etching, etching these fine lines that you can rub ink into and then press that and then repeat, press, repeat, and get, do these ghost images. So it was really fascinating to me. And then I got more involved with painting, which I was also a little bit afraid of at first. It came back to that color thing and playing with all the color. But then once I got into it, really enjoying how the colors blended and created their own colors. And I loved working off of that and shading into things. That's been one of the things that I've done a lot in my work in horizons and really shading and mixing those colors together so they has a smooth transition. So yeah, I majored in art. I graduated, and then after I graduated, I stayed at the school and was a TA, a teacher's assistant, to some of the other undergraduates and helped them put together their senior theses. Because what we had to do for our senior thesis was to actually put on a show and put on an expo, an exhibit of your work and talk about it. So I helped a lot of the students kind of help put that together, hang to work, and kind of conceptualize what all their work meant and putting that together. And from there, I also got a grant through the school working with renowned artist Saul Louet, who has passed now, but he has done a lot of these amazing, colorful forms and shapes, a lot in San Francisco and Connecticut, and obviously large scale mural size pieces in New York here as well. He has several pieces up, and it was really an amazing time translating his work onto this large scale piece, but because it also taught me skills of how to put those colors together, how to paint large scale, and really kind of again enjoying color and being rejoiced in colorful things. And I use that a lot in my work now, from coming from not being so inclined to it from detailed lines to lots of vivid color and bold color to really help bring you into the space that I'm creating. So yeah, I've got some experience from him in that way too. And then from there, I left college and came back home. Had to find a job, had to figure myself out, and in the meantime, just kind of kept painting and kept doing art shows and art exhibits where I could, tapping in where I could in the art scene. I was living in DC now at the time because my mom had moved down to the Washington, DC area when I was in high school, during the time I was in high school. So now I'm in DC and exploring the DC art scene. And, it was great. I learned a lot there. I did several shows there. And it also connected me to the design world because I took the idea of doing an exhibit, having to find a job, and doing trade show exhibits. And so doing trade show exhibits led me to connecting to the hospitality design market and doing trade show exhibits, setting up trade show exhibits for the hospitality design market, and then to designers and architects. And now I do on the side along with my art. I am a territory manager and manufacturer's rep for Forms and Surfaces, decorative metal and glass, where they do blow up artwork in glass and install that into large lobby spaces. And I'm working with a lot of architects and designers to create those installations and create those spaces and execute those spaces. So it's kind of a come full of evolution there. But at the same time, I am still, now that I'm up here in a New York City area, diving even more so in the art scene. I had taken a little bit of a break there in between to have my kid, got married, had a child, had to figure that out and try to find work balance, life balance, and then got back into art once my son was a little bit older. And he's 6 years now. So like when he was like 3, it was okay, he could walk on his own. I could kind of dive back into this stuff and really kind of going after it and really kind of exploring my work and exploring what I want from it and what I want to say about it and just continuing to develop that.
Well,
Hmm.
did you put together a good segue for me? Yes, you did.
Great. That's what I'm here for.
No, you did a really great summary. And you talk about all of that. And I think when people talk about their life and all of the things that they did, they never talk about how they were fraught with indecision. Should I do this? Should I do that? How will this all work out? And I guess as you were going through and really trying to figure out how to get back and how to have the creative career that you wanted, what were some of the things that you were feeling or emotions specifically?
It was art has always been my passion. So when I wasn't doing it, I felt stuck, There's anxieties of like, well, am I doing the right thing? And getting on the canvas and getting on the paper. And like what I mentioned to you in the very beginning of when I was out there drawing in the journal and doing little sketches, it's a meditative, it's a stress relief. It's like who I am to a core, and that's not doing it builds all this stuff up. So doing it is releasing that energy, releasing those thoughts, releasing all of the things that are on my mind and that I'm thinking about. And if I'm not doing it, I feel like I'm not being me. And so it always is in the back of mind. I got to get back to this. I got to do this again. I've got to find the space. I've got to create the space. And then so I just started taking more little steps, getting more supplies, creating a space in my dining room, finding an actual studio, connecting to other artists, going to more art shows, just making the steps and just taking a leap of faith. And whether it's a small thing or a big thing, yes, I'll do that show. Yes, I'll draw that for you. Okay, I'll do your album cover. Okay, I'll help you do some art pieces for this charitable organization. Like whatever it was, just saying yes and doing it because I knew that I wanted to be connected to art again and I had to do art again and working that around the best way I could.
Mhm. And you never know what will come about when you do say yes, right? It's just
Yeah,
oftentimes there's not a leap that happens, but it's just all of these connections that then will bring you to the thing that you're looking
yeah.
for. Now, at this point, I would love to turn the conversation to talking about some of your specific pieces. In particular, I
Hmm.
have Meeting of the Mind on the mind.
Hmm.
Can we can we talk about that?
Yeah, so this is oil on wood, just to start out with what I'm working with there. And one of the things that I like to do, like when I started painting, I always try to create a scene. I'm trying to create a story. And so one of the first things that I'm doing here is just creating this landscape, creating this plane of existence where I'm putting these forms of life, usually connected to nature, on the scene. Because I want us to sort of like connect to ourselves and how does this relate to me? What am I seeing? How can I relate to this? And I'm always putting something with nature against something that is maybe industrial or what seems like societal norms, but it's not. We want to kind of reach back out and find what's in our inner core, what's the real meaning of life. So in this scene, I've got these various birds. These birds are very tribal in their nature. They're got these mohawks and feathers, and they are already having a meeting of the minds. They're already part of nature, and they're already having conversations about the way the world is, how they're living, and what's happening. We as humans are in that far background is like a city line, right? These buildings in the far background. And in that city, people are just living in that city, but they're not really connected to nature and our world and their selves. And the people are starting to come from the city to where nature is, to the heart of it, and sort of try to connect back to that. And the bird is almost like a tree that's growing as well. So that tree is expanded, it's reaching its arms out, it's trying to bring everybody in and have us all really look at what's really important, what really matters. And the colors, like I said, I love using bright colors. It goes back to my cultural background, but also just exploring colors, and I'm loving how colors blend and work together. And I've highlighted this with like a lot of gold as well. And gold, I use oil, but then I also use paint markers, oil paint markers on top to highlight that gold. And it's really a richness. It's really a richness about ourselves if we can kind of come together and have conversations and connect, regardless of how strange or different we might seem. It's okay, right? We all have differences. We all have different thoughts. We all may not look the same. There's a lot of gray in between. But to recognize those differences and be able to still communicate and talk to each other and have conversations. When I was a kid, one of the things I also really liked were Aesop's fables. It always brought you to a scene where there was a question, and it was from this question, what do I find out? What's the moral here? What's the real story here? And it always told you something in the end. It always gave you something back in the end. And I think that's what I'm trying to do in my work. I'm trying to create a scene. I don't necessarily want to tell you exactly what I'm putting in that scene per se. I love seeing people talk about my work at shows and like just in the background, hearing what they're saying and what they're seeing and how it's relating to them and how they're feeling about it and how they're connecting to it, because that's the real thing. Traveling it through it, you're on your own, and what you might think that means to you. Maybe the people are going away from nature instead of coming to nature, right? Maybe that's happening. Maybe that's what somebody saw instead. But again, like the red fiery colors or supposed to be like the heart of it, like, and I have literally a heart in the bird connecting the arteries to himself, and it's very ordained and it's very celebrated, right, with the feathering and the leaves. And I think there were like some pearls on some of these guys or something like that, that I did like a necklace hanging. It's kind of hard to see in the picture, but there's a necklace hanging from the center bird. So they're celebrating this greatness. They're celebrating coming together. And there's so much going on in society today, political, social, racial. And I just want to have a place where people could kind of come in and not have these boxes, not have these blinders on, and not have these automatic expectations to things, and everybody, no matter who you are, coming in and seeing the strange thing but also feeling connected to it and can come in and have a conversation about it without having to fear, well, that person's black, white, or Muslim or Jewish or Catholic or Republican or Democrat. But no, we're just all coming together and experiencing this experience. And what does that mean, and what does that say?
Lana, when you had the idea for this piece, did you have it all fleshed out? Or I guess I'm curious as to how you went from the idea to the execution of the piece.
Right. I start with a concept of I am going to create a landscape, I am going to create a place. I usually have something from nature in mind, whether it's a bird, I use birds, insects, I've used giraffes, I've used elephants. These animals have their own kind of symbolism to them. And, birds take flight and take off and soar, and there's a richness to that. And I like using those things. So I already know what kind of maybe element of nature I'm going to bring to it. And then from there, I kind of flow around and see how it's speaking to me. I have a lot of these social things in my head all the time, just coming up from my background being such a mixture of cultures, Black, Indian, Portuguese, Pakistani. A lot of people in my family didn't always get along and still kind of don't really get along because of these different racial backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. When I went to boarding school, the social, economic, poor, wealthy, white, Black, all of those things creating dividing lines between us. And so I'm always having these thoughts in my mind as I'm looking at something, and it's always trying to create a way of how to bring that all together. And you can see here, going back to my line work, I'm kind of like outlining these birds, I'm outlining these things with black. I like to do that just to, really identify it and really point it out. And it just goes back to the core stuff that I like to do, which is like sketching and drawing as well. But so it kind of makes its own. It kind of makes its own story as I go along. And sometimes I look at it after I've done it, and there's more to that story that sort of evolves from that initial story or that initial message that I had. And then I hear other people say other things too. And I'm like, wow, that I could kind of see how that's connected with that part of the story too. So it sort of evolves on its own, and it's kind of meant to do that. I don't really want to have an apple on the table and say that's an apple on the table. I like having it be mysterious. I like having it have a sense of wonder, a sense of fantasticism, if that's a word, like fantasticalism, if that's maybe that's the right word. I want it to really allow people to use their imagination and explore and get out of themselves and get out of their head.
Oh, it's nice to have that space, isn't it? Because you have to really look at the work and think about what it is that you're seeing and think about how you're relating to it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have another piece that you have to share with us. I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how over the years you've kind of wrestled with what you're trying to say through your work. How has that changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it originally was just very emotional and just getting all that emotion out using color, just creating things, just things in my head that would pop up and just throwing that out there. But then it started to really form and shape. And I think it was about how are we speaking to each other? What am I presenting on this landscape started to become more and more of a question. Why am I presenting this? And so it really evolved from these bizarre places to kind of a more set landscape of horizon line, what's right in front of you and what's beyond, what's in the distance. So a lot of my work, like even the one behind me, it's up in front and center. It's mixed and it's within things mixing within itself that's telling a story. But now a lot of my newer work is look, I'm really trying to create this place, this stage, right? And I want to put things in there that have these symbolic tones and elements to it. How is that going to speak to each other? And how are we reading that? And how are those things reading each other? And seeing what people viewing it maybe starting to have a conversation about well, I think this and I think that and I think that, no, it's kind of looking like this, or it kind of forms in a weird way this way. And just all of a sudden we're starting to have just like our brain relax a little bit and the imagination flow, and we have understanding our perception of things, and really having people tell stories and communicate. I mean, it could be just as simple as that, right? Just let's talk, let's tell stories, let's communicate, let's laugh. And my work too, and although that has all this, I'm throwing out all this deeper meaning at it, that's probably just coming from my thoughts. It is also playful and fun and colorful and bold. So that's part of the story too. We don't have to be so stiff and strict about things. We can kind of flow with it and have fun with it.
Well, I wondered if we could talk about Peregrine Orbs, which is the piece that's behind you, correct?
Yes. Mhm.
So tell us about this piece.
So this is Peregrine Orbs, and basically this is talking about the peregrine eagle. So it's a very fierce, predatory eagle, and it is going after and grabbing these delicate orbs that are almost like, could be planets, it could be bubbles, it could be just organic shapes, and it's wrestled within this framework or this sort of industrial fencing behind it, and it's trying to find its way and get the fruit out from this landscape. So this one again, it's just going after this the patterns. I've got these sensations of like climbing, and there's a ladder on the left, and there's sort of a leg coming down. There's like sort of like a heel, like it's sort of stepping. So it's kind of hard to see that, but just really being, it's about really being bold and sort of going after what it is that you want, regardless of the maybe social noise. I've always tried to like, how do I describe this? It's more of like this industrial element is also just this, in my mind, this man-made social dynamic thing that we feel like we have to fit into certain boxes, or we feel like we have to be structured in certain ways. And that goes against what's natural and what's like organic. And those two things always sort of fighting itself. And then this bird, which is so natural in itself, just going after it fiercely and grabbing it for himself or herself is, just what I'm like throwing out there and putting out there. And this is one of the earlier works, so it's not as much on that horizon landscape idea like the one that we saw before. This is an earlier piece, so I have been more putting it in that landscape now, but this one is just sort of tackled within that.
Lana, can you tell us why you chose the colors that you chose And what is this painted on? Did you sketch it prior to painting? I'd love to hear about the process of how you created this piece.
This is acrylic, so it is actually clear acrylic, and I use spray paint, and I spray painted both the front and the back. So I spray painted all of the orbital loops that you see in this yellowish color, yellowish gold color, and then I spray painted more red on top of that, and then I went in and sprayed more on the that was through actually through the back. So the back of the acrylic has the gold and has the red, and then on the front I have even more red. And then I went in there with my paint markers and started to do a lot of the linear work and all the bridge work in the background and really going in there and starting to detail things. I had the eagle on my mind for a while. I have more eagles that I'll talk about later, but I had this eagle on my mind from a book that I was reading and about the peregrine eagle and it was just soaring in the book. It was just soaring through these trees. And it was just a book about it, just how it was connected to nature and flying and free. And so that had all that been on my mind for a while. And so when I had decided to do the line work, the first thing I wanted to do was go in and just have the elements of this eagle be represented on this background and make it big and bold. This piece is almost like 6 by 6 feet behind me, and really, and it actually consists of two pieces of acrylic that I've merged together, top piece and bottom piece, that's all kind of connected and framed in. And I just wanted to make this bold impact with this bird and say, let's be fierce, right? Let's be bold, let's be fierce, let's soar, let's go after what we want. And again, it was a time when I had just started back up getting back into art again. Like I had had my son, I had things and things sort of lying around, like materials lying around. A lot of this acrylic was also off-cut acrylic from a former manufacturer that I worked for that made doors out of acrylic. And I had all this off-cut, I had all this spray paint, I had all this material, and I was like, let's start using it. And then I had the bird on my brain anyway during this time of reclaiming and re-identifying. And I just sort of all came together at that point. And then once I started detailing things like all the linear work on the orbs, it just again just becomes meditative. You've got your music on, you've got your headset on, and you just get in there and start to zone out. Even the hand and the claw, that's all hashing marks. It's kind of hard to see, but all of the not the actual claw itself, but the grip before the claw comes out is all these hashing lines, like very fine lines that are hashed together. And so just getting in there and doing those little details, that was just like who I am. And like that's how I like to kind of get in there with the work and feel it and become part of it.
It sounds like you had great fun.
Oh yeah. I love having fun while I'm doing it. I love listening to fun music, whether it's like old school hip hop or some dance music or just some fun classic rock songs, whatever it is. Just kind of getting into that and zoning out with that and creating it makes it fun to create.
Oh, I'm glad. I mean, obviously, you have a love of nature, and we see nature in your work. I think we might have time for one more piece. Do you want to do the harpy eagle or the where the traveler?
Yeah, so where the travelers meet, this is a triptych. So there are three pieces that are 4 by 5 each. So it ends up being really big. And this is taking the idea of a bird flowing with the tree, sort of going back to where the minds meet, but abstracting it even further and creating this new beast or this new creature that then extends itself out and is really reaching out to nature. This is also showcasing that horizon line that that start to kind of deep dive into more. And it's the bird wants to fly, it wants to take off, it wants to be that fierce beast, but it's also sort of trapped and grounded. It wants to create, that's why its fingers are dancing on the ground, but it also feels trapped and embedded and part of this gate, and people are utilizing it. It is kind of hard to see here, but there are like little figures that are walking along the wood, that are walking along the branches and climbing up these wheels. I know maybe you have to really close in there. And then there's these fields that are below that it's soiling, and the little houses that are living on the land that they're toiling and soiling on, or traveling on, but they really just want to explode and get out there. You can see the people, it's a little blurry, but the people are trying to travel along the post and climb up, and they're using the bird instead of letting that bird or that tree grow, right? A tree bird figure that I created grow. So I just wanted to show that of like how I've been abstracting some of the figures as well, and combining the bird and combining nature. And you'll see more of that in the harpy eagle, that if you want to pull that one up. But again, the connection to nature is not necessarily because I'm like a naturalist or something. I don't know, but it's more so about the idea of what's natural to us as humans versus what we force ourselves on, or what certain identities or things that are forced upon us, other than just being good to each other and communicating with each other and talking to each other, and everybody sort of, I don't want to say a kumbaya type moment, but yeah, understanding the other, understanding your fellow man, and what feels natural to be humans, and to love and to hug and to care, instead of defining and dividing and separating and creating these kinds of what are, real structural. And that's why I say, when I say structural industrial barriers, right? Barriers that separate us, instead of us connecting and working together as one. And that's really where it comes from: nature naturally feeling that we should respect each other, naturally feeling that we should all flow together, and instead of creating all these the divisions.
Can you talk a bit about your color choice in this piece?
Yeah, again, just trying to really be bold about the color, mainly to help bring people into it. Because when you have something that this bold of color in a space, it really draws you in. It automatically pulls you in. It's like, what's happening here? This is super bright. What's going on? And then utilizing it to just create that horizon line of like, what's far back there? What's in front of you? Because again, it's a little hard to see, but on top of that yellow, there's a cityscape. There's something going on in the background that's way over there. But this stuff is happening right in front of us, right? These tree bird figures are connected and trying to work with us right in front of us. They're trying to soar and fly right in front of us. And so creating that idea of like, what's far away, what's right in front of us, and utilizing those symbols of things to have us start thinking. There's water towers in here, and I didn't talk about water towers at all, but it is one of the things that I tend to use in a lot of my work. It didn't really pop up in a bunch that we saw before, but there are some in this picture. It's the blue ones that are down below on the image. But I've always been fascinated by it because water is free flowing. It's free flowing life, right? We need water to survive. And yet we have this contained industrial thing that holds it in and keeps it trapped above the ground. And it's like we can't get to it. I know that's there as reserves. I know the purpose of it, but the visual juxtaposition of that, having water trapped, having life contained, instead of being free and open and flowing.
The last one we're chatting about is Harpy Eagle.
Yeah, harpy eagle. So going back to my roots, I started looking at, well, what are some of the trees and vegetation and animals that are in South America, in Guyana, like where I'm from, and utilizing that connection to my history and my background to the animals that I put into the pieces. And I also use animals instead of people because I'm trying to soften that idea of like, oh, there's a black woman here, and then there's a white man, or there's people talking, and that person is that person, and us automatically throwing these identifiers or things that we assume about people on it just because of what that figure might look like. And so utilizing the animals and personifying the animals kind of takes that away a little bit. Not that we don't want to recognize that, but just so we could all come in and start to have a conversation, and persona putting it in a way where we can hopefully connect to it, but it's not set and it's sort of strange. One of the people that I look to, I know we talk about who we look to. Tim Burton is one of the people that I like as an artist and a creator because it's almost like grotesque in a way or not really exacting, and that's the part I like about it because it's like it allows us to explore the what ifs. It allows us, well, that's not me and that's not something I could throw a judgment at. What am I looking at? How can we get in there? How can I relate to this? And so the harpy eagle is an eagle that is found in Central and South America. And so I kind of focus on that. It is also the top of its food chain, a very high predatorial eagle in that part of the world. And the harpy eagle is also in Roman and Greek mythology, sort of connected to the female figure and is a very feminine creature. And so that's why I've got it sort of connected with these like legs that have high heels on them. So I'm connecting my femininity to my background coming from South America and Guyana, and also using these like lily pads, these sort of like water lilies. These kinds of things are seen in a lot of the waters and riverways in a lot of the images and stuff that I looked at that are in Guyana and in South America. And so again, putting that in that horizon line background of like there's things in the beyond, but then there's things right in front of us. And what are we looking at that's right in front of us that we might be missing? And it also has this kind of silhouette shape that comes down to this robotic looking almost creature looking down at this other horizon landscape within it. So there's a lot that's beyond, there's a lot right in front of us, there's a lot that's within, that it's all about reflecting, right? Reflecting back on ourselves and what we might be feeling in that moment.
What materials did you use to paint this one?
Yeah, this one is actually ink and colored pencil on recycled board. And I did pick up specifically some of the colors of the flag of Guyana in here. It has green, it has red, it has yellow. So the more recent work is not only trying to have those social conversations, but also digging a little bit back into my roots a little bit, and seeing how I could kind of connect that as well onto these fantastical landscapes.
How big is this one piece?
This is actually a smaller piece. This piece is about 1 foot by 1 foot. So this is a
This
small
is such
detail
a
piece.
treat, Lana, because we normally don't have artists walk us through their work, which is something that I'm aiming to do more on the podcast.
I appreciate the opportunity to do so because sometimes there's you're looking at a lot of stuff and again, I also wanted to tell a story, but I want somebody else to find their own story. But I like being able to point out certain things to help maybe guide that. And it is important to be able to find my voice and to sort of express what I might be trying to tell in some of that story. You know what I mean? So I appreciate being able to walk through some of those pieces.
So, Lana, you describe your work as fantastical landscapes that are designed to produce a disconnection from the real world, thus highlighting unusual and even awkward interactions to awaken one's imagination. I'm wondering, as you've gone through your career, how have you gone about finding collectors and finding a happy home for your work?
Well, right now there's a couple things that I am connected to. So I'm part of the Black Artists and Designers Guild here in New York. It's an international organization that supports obviously Black and colored artists, and I have found a lot of connection through there, a lot of networking opportunity through there, and through that organization. It's a wonderful organization, and I also have my studio in the Mana Contemporary building here in Jersey City, New Jersey. Meta Contemporary is a community of artists. There's lots of artists in my building, and they also have a location in Chicago and Miami. And through these networks and through Mina, I've been able to find curators, shows. I've been able to connect to shows, and there's been a lot of fairs too, art fairs that are where I can just put on a booth and a show and sell work directly on the floor. So, and finding homes for the work and pieces through that, but also finding galleries and curated connections through that as well. So just diving in more, and then surprisingly, Instagram is you put yourself out there, people start to connect, right? You go to an event, people start to connect, they start to write you, they start to tell you things. So just doing more on social media, doing more on these shows, connecting to these communities and these outlets that I have available to me, that has been able to get my work out there, get visibility out there, and find happy homes for several pieces.
You've been doing this and really owning your style and developing your style and really thinking about what it is that you have to say through your work. If you were to think back to the Lana who was graduating from St. Andrews and who was looking to find her way into this creative field, what kind of advice would you have for her?
Advice, yeah, advice. I would tell her you can do it. Like just believe that you can do it, because a lot of the times you just don't think that, am I an artist? Can I do this? Am I making a statement? Am I saying the right thing? Because even when I explain my work, I'm like, I don't know if I'm actually even saying it what I was thinking, having those moments of like, I want to say this, but maybe I'm not saying it right, but it doesn't matter. I think the whole thing is just to kind of put yourself out there, do it, connect, go to events, see shows, talk about it. I still have my core, like traditional artists, I would say, like Frida Kahlo and Salvador Dali are very influential in the work I do. Tim Burton, like I mentioned, are very influential in the work I do, just from landscapes, from vegetation, like Frida Kahlo does, like the angst in her work and the trauma in her work and that kind of stuff, and the stories she wants to tell, those are there. But what I've been finding more so now is just talking to more local artists and their work and what their stories are. Talking, like a show that I'm doing right now through Mana Contemporary is a collection of various Black and Indigenous and colored people, and they have such different stories. It's not just showing about necessarily about being African American and slavery, which a lot of times, unfortunately, when you think of Black art, that's that box that's created. It's a colorful spectrum of work of people from a colorful spectrum, right? People have variety, that people have different cultures, different mixes. It's not just black. It's all these combinations of gray that make all these beautiful colors and different work. And talking to these different artists and talking about what they put into their stuff and why they put it, and hearing their stories only fuels more of my work and more of my stories, and what I might be doing. And also seeing different techniques and skill sets and mediums and things that people are playing with. So just putting yourself out there, not being afraid to say yes, you're an artist. You enjoy it, then you're an artist. You love doing it, then you're an artist. Creating, then you're an artist. So just saying that it's okay to accept that, and it's okay to do that, and then just have fun with it and play and enjoy it.
Oh, that should be a rallying cry. That's
Have fun.
awesome. I think, sometimes, there's so much that gets lost in the doing that some people forget the fun. And I have to say that I often forget about the fun as well, and to enjoy the process and enjoying the journey.
Yeah, enjoy the process. Don't get so caught up on the restriction. Don't get, because I was caught up for a while about like, well, I'm supposed to be a black artist, right? And I was kind of caught up with that and a little bit like, well, I don't necessarily like to paint what that would be thought of, perhaps, right? What that would be labeled as. And then I was like, well, I shouldn't even worry about that. I'm just going to do me. I'm just going to do the things that I love to do. I'm going to paint the things that I enjoy painting and tell the stories that I enjoy telling, because it's my story to tell. And I'm hoping that people are drawn to that and enjoy it as much as I do creating it, and just to keep going forward. So that's what I would tell myself. Just keep doing it. Just keep painting. Any young artists out there just, trying to dabble, just keep doing it, and putting yourself out there. Little opportunity, big opportunity, take it all on, and don't stop.
That's perfect. Lana, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so much fun. I feel like you have refilled my batteries as well in terms
I hope
of
you feel better.
thinking. Oh, well, there's that too. But just really thinking about, what is it that you're saying and what are you trying to accomplish? And even thinking about your work in the greater context of society, of what's happening and social commentary. And you've given me a lot of things to think about. And I'm sure that if you've given me a lot of things to think about, then our listeners will walk away with just this really rich episode. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate your time.